back here on the show today to continue on this main topic around Brandon Aiyuk and the contract situation that's going on with him. And not only that, but also trading for him seems to be becoming a lot harder, as you guys would have already imagined, to actually get done. And now we're moving on from just talking about Brandon and how he feels and what he's been doing, but now on the Cleveland Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers side of things, right? Because they are rumored to be the favorite up until this point, with the Patriots reportedly pulling out of a potential trade for Aiyuk back on Tuesday evening. Now it just leaves pretty much the Steelers, the Browns, and I want to throw in the Washington Commanders too. I know it seems like out of left field that I'm just randomly throwing the Commanders in there. I could have almost said anybody pretty much, but I think the Commanders still, for me, it makes too much sense to not get something done, or at least not hear their name more in these reports. And I'll get to my reasons behind that once I get to them. I'll break down each team. But again, one of the key points to this entire thing is that Aiyuk, again, I want to stress on this segment that he does not have a no trade clause on his contract. Basically, it does have to revolve around his contract extension and pretty much acting like a no trade clause. Similar to Dak, if the Cowboys were to trade him, he actually has a no trade clause in his contract, so it doesn't have to do anything with whether that other team can extend him or not. It just has to do with him wanting to go to that team or not. And this situation with Aiyuk has to do mainly with his contract. If that other team can offer him something that he wants, in all reality, he could accept that, and if they meet the 49ers asking price, then this thing could get done in the next hour or something like that. But it seems like Brandon Aiyuk is holding out right now for what is rumored to be his preferred destination in the Steelers. But the Steelers don't really have too much to give up on the other side of things. It is rumored that ideally that the 49ers would want to get a receiver back, and the Steelers are probably not going to trade George Pickens. And then after that, if you're just talking wide receiver, I don't think they're going to want Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin III, Roman Wilson, or anybody like that. So that's where the Steelers are kind of stuttering in their approach in these negotiations for Brandon Aiyuk, which leaves the Cleveland Browns as a very enticing place for this trade to get done, because talking about the Browns and all the factors that go into them potentially trading for Brandon Aiyuk, they have a receiver that I think the 49ers would be pretty happy to accept going the other way in Amari Cooper. And when Amari Cooper sort of threatened to hold out of training camp back when minicamp ended, the idea was that the Browns were going to agree to restructuring his deal, and they ended up doing that, but they didn't add any extra years. They just guaranteed the $20 million that he will be owed this year. They guaranteed that plus another $5 million on top of that he could earn through incentives. So they basically just gave him more guaranteed money in his final year. They didn't technically extend him, so he will be a free agent next offseason. And for the contract that he has, it is around the range that probably the 49ers would be all right in giving him. I don't see Amari Cooper in a potential extension asking for more than maybe $28 million at most. And I think the 49ers would be all right with paying that, because that's already what they wanted to offer Brandon Aiyuk. So from a contract standpoint, having Amari on the 49ers isn't or shouldn't be any problems. And then also getting Amari back at the peak of his playing career back for Brandon Aiyuk, who is just ascending into his, prime right now, I think is a good trade-off compared to the other offers that you're getting. I think this one makes the most sense. And also the Browns have experience in these sort of situations, right? Talking about bidding wars and offering a boatload of draft picks for getting the player that everybody wants, right? The highly sought-out player this offseason. They did it back, I'm forgetting the year, but they obviously did it back with Deshaun Watson, where it was either the Browns, I want to say the Falcons, and maybe one other team that were in the running for Deshaun Watson, but the Browns were willing to give up the most, offering Deshaun Watson the most guaranteed money ever in NFL history. So they have experience in this sort of thing. They ended up getting the last player, so that kind of gives you more confidence that the Browns could be leading this race right now. And also, they are pretty fortunate that Jerry Jeudy isn't on a huge contract. They extended him already before playing any snaps with them, but it isn't a massive contract. I think he's maybe the he might be outside the top 10 in terms of highest paid receivers, so that's ideal. Bringing in a contract of 30 plus $1 million really wouldn't be a conflict with Jerry Jeudy's contract on top of that. And also, they are in a spot where they're a good team, but adding Brandon Aiyuk, I think, would elevate them a little bit more and add more to this team in a more dynamic way, whereas Amari Cooper maybe doesn't give you everything that Brandon Aiyuk does in terms of blocking and just being in the mess of things, where Amari, I don't want to say that he shies away from it, but maybe he just isn't as active as Brandon in terms of the running game and blocking down the field like you see Brandon Aiyuk do so many times. So that's all the positives. That's all the positive regards and factors with the Cleveland Browns. But the only thing that, I find it a little bit questionable is that if you're going to give up Amari Cooper, how much better are you really becoming if you're the Cleveland Browns? I just said that it would bring a different dynamic to this team. You get a younger receiver, probably could reach the heights of what Amari Cooper's done in his career. But you'd ideally, in a perfect world, if you're the Cleveland Browns, you'd want to have both of those guys on your team and Jerry Jeudy on your team as well. But unfortunately, that's not how it's going to work. The 49ers want a high position of need for them. If it's not going to be a wide receiver, another position of need, maybe on the offensive line or a pass rusher or something like that, that the Browns are willing to give up. But right now, Amari Cooper's name has been mostly in these trade talks, but that doesn't really make them exponentially better than they were with Amari Cooper on their team already. So that's the only thing that they really have to weigh in these conversations with the 49ers. And then that brings me to the other AFC North team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the good thing about the Steelers is that it seems like Aiyuk wants to be there. It's not really all about the money, because if it was, he would have accepted the New England deal and he would already be there probably by now, because this is going all the way back to Monday now that the 49ers are listening to trade offers. So it really doesn't have to do with the money. I think Aiyuk's trying to get the best of both worlds, and that's why we're struggling a lot with seeing any development up until this point. But I think with the Steelers, you have to think of a few things. With questions at quarterback, in reality, you don't know who your starter's going to be. Is it smart to go out and give up a lot probably for Brandon Aiyuk and then also have to pay him when you might have to pay one of these quarterbacks? And on top of that, speaking of paying important players, Najee Harris is due for a contract extension, Cam Hayward as well, Pat Freiermuth is also due for an extension, and then you also have George Pickens down the line. If you get a couple of these guys done, how will that affect George Pickens, and what will the market look like at the time you have to extend George Pickens as well? So all of that, I think, are the biggest factors to me. All the extensions that the Steelers have to get done down the line would be reasons to question this deal for the Steelers. Is it really worth it to go out and get a guy like Brandon? Of course, it makes their team so much better with Brandon on their team, pairing him with George and Pat and all the weapons that they have. But it might not be the smartest move to make in terms of business and the financial side of things on top of that. But ideally, if they were to get this deal done, this would be one of their best offenses since arguably when they had Le'Veon, Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, they had Martavis Bryant. Their offense was one of the best, if not the best, in the NFL. This would probably be right up there with it, in my opinion. I know we haven't seen him play at all, but in terms of on paper, it would be one of the best that the Steelers have put out there on the field over the last few years. So that is, again, super exciting, but I don't know how smart of a trade this could be for the Steelers based on what they have to give up and the state of their team at this point in time. And then my wild card team, my curveball team, the Washington Commanders, it makes too much sense to me that they are not one of the leading teams. I know today I saw that the 49ers are sort of fielding some other offers out there from different teams. I think I heard the Raiders in there, among some other teams, that the 49ers are trying to potentially get involved in this deal if anything is going to get done with Brandon Aiyuk. And I find it hard to believe, again, that the Commanders are completely out of it, just because there's too many factors that scream that this could be a perfect situation for not only Aiyuk, but for the Washington Commanders as well. Because of the asking price, that could be the main obstacle standing in their way, because, draft pick wise, are the Commanders in a spot development-wise with the entirety of their team that they are willing to give up and gamble away a lot of their future, sort of like the Rams did when they traded and they had that big trade with Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford. Are the Commanders in the same spot where they feel that they're confident enough to go out and get Brandon Aiyuk and, get the rewards that it does play off with a massive trade like that? I think that's the biggest obstacle at this point in time. It makes sense also, apart from, what you're willing to give up to bring Brandon Aiyuk over. One of the biggest questions I have with the Commanders is their skill-based positions. You have Terry McLaurin. He's obviously a great wide receiver. But on the other side, who else do you have to pair with him? None of the other names really stick out too much. You have brought in, Austin Eckler. You have Jahan Dotson as well. But then outside of that, in reality, you don't have too many guys that scare opposing defenses that much. So pairing Terry with Brandon, and not only that, you have that relationship between Jaden Daniels and Brandon Aiyuk already. They've spent a lot of time this offseason together, so again, I find it hard to believe that they're not at least talking about this possibility of potentially playing with each other yet again. And talking about relationships, their new general manager, Adam Peters, is coming from being the assistant general manager with the 49ers. So you already have a connection there. You already have a line of communication as well. I don't understand why the Commanders wouldn't be in a position to at least be rumored around Brandon Aiyuk, even if it's still the biggest issue with all of this being that they just can't offer anything. I find it just very weird that they haven't been mentioned with the Steelers, with the Browns up until this point, but maybe they're just keeping it silent, keeping it a secret at this point to not maybe ruin any progress that they have made. But those are the three teams, really, in my opinion, that not only make the most sense, but also that I would like to see Brandon Aiyuk go to. I think I would like to see him go to the Commanders the most, just because it makes the most sense at this point in time based on what they have to give up. And pairing him with Terry, I think would be so great for Jaden Daniels. But for right now, I think Cleveland is probably in the best situation. I would like him to go to the Commanders ideally, but Cleveland probably seems to be the best deal. They have the best deal in place right now to agree with something to the 49ers, but it is just a circus right now and what's going to happen, how Brandon Aiyuk's mood changes. Are they able to convince him to join the Browns? Maybe he still waits out for the Steelers. Are the Steelers willing to give in one of their best players potentially? It's all going to be just a mess, honestly, going forward, but I feel like we're close. I feel like we are close to finding a breakthrough in all of this. Usually deals like this, I feel like, happen over the weekend, so I wouldn't be surprised, of course, like it always happens, if I get off of the air on Friday and then the news breaks Friday late at night or Saturday morning, and then we have a whole weekend to just sit on the news and not talk about it. But I feel like we're close. We're getting close to something getting done. A lot of talks have been going on, and I just feel like it's just a matter of time before we see some action. But let me know what you guys think on all of this, on all that information I just threw out at you. Where do you guys see Brandon Aiyuk going? Where's the best spot that you think not only produces the best product, but also is worth it for any team giving up a lot of assets to trade for him as well? But we'll leave that topic there, and we'll move on to three brand new ones that I want to talk about on today's show. Some of the remaining questions for the NFC East teams. Continuing on from yesterday's NFC North, we're going to move on to the NFC East and talk about some of the biggest remaining questions for the teams in that division. And also, Jalen Carter, the Eagles star pass rusher from last year, he is trying out a new position, and he could be deployed on the edge of their defensive line in 2024. I'll give my thoughts on that and also answer some of these remaining questions in the NFC East when we return. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Look